Welcome back to day 4 of the SolarPower Summit. My name is Mate Heiss, and I'm Head of International Cooperation at SolarPower Europe, and it is my pleasure to be the host of today's side event about solar investment opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa. And so in this second session of today, we will be looking at the African market outlook with a focus on solar IPP and C&I. And this is basically the presentation of the results of SolarPower Europe's global market outlook, where we had a dedicated chapter about sub-Saharan Africa, about historical developments, market developments, and also an outlook. And so the presentation will be made by SolarPower Europe's Head of Market Intelligence and Executive Advisor, Michael Schmela. And so I'm not taking more time. I'm already handing over the word to Michael, who will guide us through the results of our chapter. And before that, indeed, thank you for switching to this slide. I would also like to point to Slido and invite the participants to submit questions, because at the end of the session we will have some time for questions and answers. So if you would like to submit questions to Michael or myself, then type slide.do in your browser, and if you enter the code #SolarPowerSummit, then you will access the page where you can send the questions, and we will see those questions and we'll select a few to discuss at the end of the presentation. So, Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Mate, for this kind introductions. Hello to everyone. Happy to talk today about Africa. So, is it me having the? Okay. So today we want to talk about the sub-Saharan Africa PV market. As Mate already said, we are at SolarPower Europe, we are covering worldwide solar developments in our annual global market outlook. That's simply our market intelligence overall, which we publish every year with a great support from the Global Solar Council, many regional and national associations, and Intersolar. And to provide better insight into the world's most promising markets, we have always invited for the last few years leading national solar associations to talk about gigawatt markets. In the 2020 edition, SSA countries are not present on that level yet. However, we were very happy that with the support of Get Invest, we were able to write a chapter on sub-Saharan Africa, and that's why you see it also marked red on that map. And this is the first time where we're focusing on the global market outlook on an emerging on-grid solar region. So it's really great. And again, thanks to everyone who contributed, and in particular to Get Invest. So where are we? Let's first go briefly back to global. So to put things into perspective. So solar added more than any other power generation technology in 2019. So 117 gigawatt of on-grid solar were installed globally. The interesting thing is what you see on this slide here is that solar, that's the yellow line, is continuously growing its share. So that means in 2019, the solar share, that means the capacity additions, were at 48%. So that means every second installed whatever unit was power generation unit was solar. If you look at and that's continuously growing since 2015. Solar was twice as much as wind. We were bigger than all fossil fuels together. So it's amazing what's happening. Still, we have to think into perspective. If you look at the bar charts, you see very much at the bottom, in yellow, the part of solar power generation shares worldwide. So that means while that is growing also, we are still only at 2.6%. Again, solar is growing quickly. Think about exponential growth. Think about mobiles, how they took off at some point. I think we are at that juncture where it's really going now very, very fast up. But there's some immense market potential that we still have to capture. When we go down or approaching the area we want to talk about, we see, of course, that it's even less. So from the 117 gigawatts that was installed worldwide, 6.8 gigawatts, so that means less than 5%, was installed in Middle East Africa. So that's the region where we're usually covering. So Africa is part of that region. And if you go one step further, we look at that Africa is less than half of what was installed in the Middle East Africa regions in 2019. If we go down to SSA, we simply see that, again, half of that was installed in that region. Nevertheless, I think, again, here also the potential is great. And it's probably, I don't know, it's probably even greater in Africa than in many other regions. So this cost reduction that we've seen recently is also coming down to Africa. It doesn't have to be obviously as low as in developed countries where the interest rate environment is different, the financing access is different. But nevertheless, if you look at this selection of the lowest solar auction bids that we collected for 2019, you can see obviously here that there are now a couple of tenders in the sub 2 cents, so in the 1 cent level regions, so in Europe, in the Middle East, and in South America. But there are many that are sub 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And I think 2 of these are interestingly in Africa. That's Tunisia. And with Ethiopia, we have even 1 member of SSA. Of course, we have to always say, comma, but this is an exception. This was part of the Scaling Solar tender from the World Bank. This was a huge project, 250 megawatt, and it was won by one of the world leading developers, Aqua. And we also know that there are some delays in the program, but nevertheless, I think the direction is there. Power prices, LCOEs are going down, and this is true for any place on this planet. And this obviously also benefits Africa and SSA. Okay, let's look at our global market outlook. So in total, so here you see the annual, I haven't put down the cumulative, but if you look at the total installed capacity in SSA at the moment, we're around 3.8 gigawatts, with South Africa alone being responsible for 2.5 gigawatt. And if we look in terms of annual market size, in 2019, we see that the Sub-Saharan Africa doubled from almost half a gigawatt to now 1.3 gigawatt, and thus reaching also for the first time gigawatt scale as a region. For the upcoming years, we expect the region to significantly benefit from the technology price reductions for both solar and also for storage, which we're also now seeing more and more. And of course, also from the increased efforts to reach complete energy access, which many countries have on their agenda. And we're also seeing that financial support instruments, we've already talked a lot about that, and will also in the later sessions for each of these countries do that, so financial support instruments and tender schemes are maturing. Innovative business models will continue to emerge more and more. So that we see really in the coming 5 years quite some growth, and actually stronger growth than we expected for the rest of the world. So that means if you look at it, so we think that between 2024 21 gigawatt in our medium scenario in total could be added, and we could reach almost 6 gigawatt alone in 2024. So I would like to go a little bit into the countries, not too deep. So I think I want to kind of give an overview on the 5 biggest markets. So when you look at the key markets in the region, you see actually a pattern that is not so much different from anywhere else in the world. Because let's go back to Europe, where we are here at the moment. So last year, I think in the EU, 16, 17 gigawatts was installed. Half of that, 2 countries, Germany and Spain. If you look at the region here, okay, there's 1 country completely dominating. That's South Africa with 40%. I think you could also maybe make the comparison with China and the world here, which is a similar ratio. But then you see actually three further countries that have also installed more than 100 megawatt per year. That's Namibia, Kenya, and Zambia. So these 3 markets had a market share of roughly 2/3. Nevertheless, we're seeing a lot of activities in the other countries, and regulation, decreasing costs, that all helps move solar basically everywhere in SSA and Africa as a whole. Okay, largest market, South Africa. Best structured solar market in SSA, with a very long history in tenders. Actually, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Procurement Program has been there for years. It provides state guarantees for 20 years of production, and it has really succeeded in attracting not only international IPPs, but also local participants. So I think it's an interesting program. There were some issues with that as of recently, which looks like it's now being solved. And so there's also now the new integrated resource plan, which was announced last year and which foresees a leading role for solar and wind, and under which 6 gigawatt of new solar PV projects are planned to be commissioned until 2030. So I think there's a lot of potential and hope for South Africa to remain a leading market, or the leading market in the region. The next big market is Zambia, and I think Zambia has appeared probably on the solar map, at least to the international community, when the World Bank Group Scaling Solar program started back in 2015. It was the first country where they started, and it resulted in an initial 54 megawatt PV plant from First Solar that went online 2019, and a 34 megawatt project from Enel. And then we had also the Get Fit Zambia tender program, which started 2017 and resulted in awards of 120 megawatts. And now actually there's so many large scale solar plants for Zambia. So it will be really interesting to see what will happen. The second round of Scaling Solar alone has 500 megawatt of solar capacity. So I think this country will be also very attractive for a number of reasons. I think there was so there are always, of course, also issues, limited grid capacity, low electrification rates, but nevertheless, these are also opportunities. Let's look at Kenya, also one of the pioneering renewable markets in Africa. I think both for off-grid, which we are not covering, but also for C&I projects, and to a lesser extent also for IPP. Big target, universal access of electricity very soon, 2022. And off-grid and solar and mini grids are identified in the Kenya National Electrification Strategy as low-cost options to achieve this aim. So solar added around 100 megawatt last year, significant share C&I projects. I think there were also issues. I think that's an interesting also case study. Kenya as a whole, when they had the first feed-in tariff, and then this whole thing was frozen. More than 2 gigawatts of generation capacity were simply partly developed and were frozen. So these investments, that investors really got into quite some trouble. In the meantime, actually, the signed PPAs have been or are being renegotiated, and the good news is actually that in December 2019, the first 50 megawatt PV plant was inaugurated. There's also new projects in the pipeline, and again, I think more details later. An auction scheme is currently under discussion to replace the FITs, but more or a lot of food for discussion here, but a lot of potential. Next country is Uganda. So interesting about Uganda is that it was the first African country to completely unbundle its state utility, and that resulted in higher collection rates, lower transaction losses, a bankable off-taker emerged, and so I think the whole country became really attractive for renewable energy investments. And indeed, there have been actually several smaller IPP investment, including a 20 megawatt solar project from KfW's Get Fit program. And there was even this announcement in 2020 that the Chinese state-owned energy conglomerate would secure an EPC contract to build 500 megawatts of solar generation and capacity in Uganda. So I think let's see if that happens. I think there are all these big announcements, and it's great that they are, and it will be even greater if they all, or at least some of them, also turn into reality. Another country with big plans is Namibia. Also, for many people, probably not on the on-grid solar radar until recently. That was when the country, together with Botswana, was looking into building a 5 gigawatt solar mega project over the next 20 years. But aside from the big buzz about this project, so Namibia's on-grid market has actually steadily emerged into a decent size over the years, making it one of sub-Saharan Africa's largest. The nice thing is that the country in 2016 adopted an ambitious national renewable energy target of 70% of the energy mix by 2030. And to achieve this goal, the country is really promoting renewable projects via tenders for larger systems. There's a feed-in scheme, and there's even a net metering scheme for smaller systems. So last year, I think we think that over 200 megawatt was installed, and I think the trend is also moving up here clearly. The last country I would like to mention on this list here is Zimbabwe, which has also gigantic plans. So they strive to reach 1.6 gigawatt of solar capacity by 2030, and they had only around 50 at the end of 2019. They also started the National Renewable Energy Policy this year to back this ambition, and and to really streamline procedures and timelines for project developments below 5 megawatts. There was also in May a tender announcement for 500 megawatt of solar projects, and I think there was big news also for one of the big projects that was end of last year when Zimbabwe and the United Arab Emirates also reportedly agreed on 2 gigawatt of solar capacity to be built in the country within the next 18 months. So time is ticking. Let's see when we're there. In any case, again, big plans, big potential, and the market will grow for sure. Okay, let's speed up a little bit. I think we wanted to focus on two different segments, that is IPPs and C&I. So just briefly, actually, about the drivers for utility scale project. Then I want to go into a few case studies, and I want to do the same thing for C&I. So IPP policy frameworks have indeed been implemented as part of wider reforms to the power sector in Africa and in SSA for quite some time now, and that's really starting to pay off. So in the beginning, that was mostly about larger projects, so above 50 megawatts also, but the focus in several countries is now on a somewhat smaller scale. The smaller projects are, on the one hand, often, of course, easier to integrate because the power grids are sometimes still weak, and they are also more accessible to local developers. On the other hand, of course, if you work with DFIs, then the bigger the project, the better, because I think the effort are often the same, and for getting the financing, and if you do that for bigger sums, which often the big banks like to, if they do it, like to give, then of course the project has to have some sort of scale. The typical IPP model is usually an electric sale agreement with one buyer, and that's often the national utility. In terms of financing, developers are usually focusing on obtaining best concessional rates for senior debts. Of course, everyone is doing that, the difference makes then in the end often the equity. So that means companies who have access to that actually usually make it in the end. Let's go to a few projects which we also showed in more details in our survey, in our global market outlook. I think one of this year was in South Africa, still under development, also a bigger project, 300 megawatt PV project cluster, broken down into 3 smaller projects on grid, using even trackers also. So getting also some sophistication in that, not only just fixed. It is from Abo Wind, a developer from Germany. And so they describe also some challenges. They really see some strong competition for really good areas in order to develop the system, because grid availability is an issue in resource-rich areas. And you have, of course, the strict tender conditions in South Africa. And of course, from a logistics point of view, there are also challenges because these are large areas. So the strategy, how this team is working, is they try to combine a local team, a strong local team, with international expert in their headquarters. And they really want to go bigger. They directly develop a pipeline of over 2 gigawatt, which is also close to each other. So and what they want to do is then actually, with those chunks that are developed, they want to participate in the tenders. Another project, interesting project, is in Mali. That was the 50 megawatt Kita project, Mali's first large-scale IPP PV power plant that was commissioned in March this year. The developer was Accor Energy from France. Drivers were incredibly good resources, 2.1 megawatt hours per square meter, and overcome the power shortage. And I think Mali wants to strive always towards energy independence. Challenge is there was no legal framework at that time. And obviously in Mali, there's military conflicts. So I think you had to put a lot of effort and also money into security measures. Strategy was to register local SPV. They signed a long-term 28-year PPA with the public utility. The SPV raised 20% equity, of which 10% was mezzanine, 70% was debt, and that came through DFIs with long-term non-recourse financing scheme, because of course the PPA is over 20 years. So very interesting project. And a third one was that we have in Sudan. And I think this is really interesting because it also shows that you can do in emerging countries somewhat more fancy projects, if I might say so. We're talking here about the 19 megawatt ground mount system with 60 megawatt hours gravitational concrete storage tower in Sudan. So that means there will be 2 concrete towers. Concrete is actually a nice way to store the energy. And that was done by an agricultural group. That was the Hager Group. And that was also, they contracted a European EPC Photon Energy. And that was also supported by Get Invest. And again, here the strategy is also multi-DFI finance, SPV. They need quite some money, 34 million euros, 35% equity, somewhat a higher share, 65% senior debt, and they hope to close that in Q1 2021. Quickly to C&I. So one of the most promising and most active solar segments, which is obviously offering players to become independent from often unreliable grids. And the second driver is, of course, also happening there or in those countries where self-generation costs are much lower. And I think we have to say much lower, not just 5%, it should be 10 to 30% than grid power. Other drivers are also, and we're seeing that, corporate environmental targets of big multinationals. This is usually financed through direct system sales or for larger projects, PPAs, or even leasing, which has the advantage that at some point you can even keep the asset. And the biggest barrier is the absence of debt finance at accessible rates, so financing often an issue. How companies are often trying to address that, they try to partner with more experienced international developers, may help local project developers that have little track record to get the financing. Yeah, 1 minute, okay. 2 studies. So one is here interesting in Kenya, that was from Unilever. So you have one big multinational, T-Plantage, actually hybrid PV project, 618 kilowatt. They worked with a local developer and the European EPC, Solar Century. Driver was to reduce power costs, challenges, international logistics. And here, interestingly, it worked like this. The EPC funded the project on its own balance sheet until completion. Then the developer purchased the asset and is now operating the plant under a PPA with Unilever. I leave this study, which is also interesting. You can leave that, you can read about this in the report. just the final recommendations, and we take that actually from one of our many partners who have contributed to our global market outlook. One was AFSIA, the African Solar Industry Association, and their recommendations for sustainable PV growth and SSA are: first, solar storage has to become a very attractive option for both on-grid and off-grid projects. They really urge to develop national and regional standards to avoid low quality products that might actually result in solar getting a bad name in certain markets. And they also highlight that pre-financed offers such as pay-as-you-go or some solar as a service are key enablers for PV adoption. And they also mentioned that we should also look at niche segments that really contain a large untapped potential: agri-PV, solar street lighting, solar for e-mobility. So more or less the same things that we are also looking here in Europe and other developed countries. That's my final words, and I would give back to Mate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael. Michael Schmela is head of market intelligence at SolarPower Europe and also executive advisor. And I think you set the scene very well for the following sessions, the deep dive discussions. The first one of which will be on Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. We will start in 28 minutes, and then we will have a second one on Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana. And so I think Michael, you managed to cover the entire region very well. And we also don't have time for questions, unfortunately. However, I would really like to encourage the participants to bear with us because we have reserved a lot of time for Q&A in the deep dive discussions. And I'm sure that our guests, our speakers in the next two sessions will be very happy to answer to those questions. So thank you very much, Michael. We will wrap up this session now, and we will be back in 27 minutes with the first deep dive discussion. So thank you very much, and see you in a bit.
Thanks, Mate. Take care.